Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman, live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about a very important topic, and that is about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the future prospects. As we all know, that the relationship between UAE and Israel has been formalized. A lot of trade agreements, and other than that, a lot is happening on that front. Countries like Bahrain, Oman, as well as Saudi Arabia seem to be on the same page. When we talk about Qatar, there was a dispute, rather, there was this problem a few years ago when the Saudi Crown Prince wanted them to shut down their television channel, Al Jazeera, and also sort of, have some ties with certain countries and cut off ties with Iran and so on and so forth. And there was this 10-point agenda which the Qatari government refused. Now, the interesting part is that now they're also talking about normalization of the relationship with Qatar. This is what is happening in Middle East. You talk about the Yemen conflict, still is going out there, and a lot of people are dying on a daily basis. A lot is happening on that front, and no clear-cut objective has been achieved by the UAE and Saudi forces out there, except for bombing and killing the civilians. On the other hand, when you talk about the Israelis, it seems that after the meeting between the Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in the new city of Neom, and the Secretary of State Mr. Pompeo was also present, and they held a very, very important meeting in which certain major issues were discussed, and I think they will be normalizing their relationship with Israel pretty soon. But obviously, since this problem has been there for almost over 70 years, a lot has been happening, and especially when we talk about the aggression of the Israelis towards the Egyptians or towards the Palestinians, towards the Jordan, towards so many other countries in their particular area. Eventually, now they have grabbed a lot of land out there. And that is what the problem is all about primarily. But Israel has normal relationship with the Egyptians also, primarily with the Arab countries. Now, talking about the differences as far as this major, mega relationship is concerned, there are differences. Prince Turki bin Faisal, in fact, was very vocal, and he was very open, and he said there were major issues, and he talked about the lands forcefully occupied by the Israelis in the Arab world. He also spoke about the prisoners who are in the concentration camps inside the Israeli prisons, and interestingly, they are subjected to maximum torture. And then, talking about the proper settlement of the issue, they really want that certain areas should be vacated, and a two-state solution that was earlier proposed should be implemented. Now, will it happen or not? But before we start the show and I introduce you to our panelists, let me make you hear what Prince Turki bin Faisal said. But rather, let me introduce the guest first. We have with us on Skype Abid Latif Sindhu Saab. He's a defense analyst. Sindhu Saab, thank you very much for your time, sir. Ali Savan Naqvi Saab, former ambassador. He's also joining us on Skype. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab. And we'll also be talking to Hassan Abdullah, who's a correspondent of TRT World, the Turkish television. But Abid Saab, talking about the current scenario, which is developing in the Middle East, the interesting part is that it seems that the major countries, the G6 countries primarily, will not oppose anything, and they will consider Israel as legitimate, and they will accept the relationship with the other Islamic countries in the Middle East. Now, looking at the history, looking at the past, the kind of aggression that took place, the justice wasn't served at all. Look at the people who are still in the concentration camps and subjected to torture. And then on top, we all know the kind of lands which earlier were with the Palestinian people, they were snatched, and illegal colonies and housing setups were established. Now, talking about the two-state solution, sir, what needs to be done? Will it happen, or how is it going to be sorted out? Your take, Sindhu Saab.
I would I would say that actually the problem is, as we all know, that there is a shadow of history to this problem, and the problem is historical in its context and manifestation. So there would not be any easy solutions which we are looking for. Actually, there are a lot many UN resolution on the subject. The latest, which was just passed, the resolution 2334, and also the fourth committee approval, in which the 12 draft resolutions were also pronounced concerning the settlements and also the occupied Arab lands by the Israel. So if we take these things in context, and if we try to visualize that how to go about this Palestine problem as a whole, we have to see that there are basically three main players. One is located at Gaza, that is Hamas. The other is at the West Bank, that is PLO and Palestinian Authority. And the third is around Jerusalem, that is the Israeli state. And all the other players which are actually trying to bring all these three segments for negotiations and to context each other also, and also to reach to a solution, are outside territorially from this problem. So once whenever these three agree to talk and agree to disagree, only then I think the concrete solution, or the problem of the Palestine, will be addressed in its true sense. Till then, we'll have negotiation, we'll have Oslo Accord, we'll have first Intifada, we'll have second Intifada, and so on and so forth. So I think for reaching to a concrete solution to the problem, all the players, all the parties, and that too inclusive of the conflict, are to be taken on board and to be the part of any negotiations right now going on, or negotiations to take place in the future.
All right. Now, Ali Seven Naqvi Saab, before I put a question to you, since you have served in that part of the world as an ambassador and you understand the details out there, let's hear what Prince Turki bin Faisal had to say.
As a small, existentially threatened country surrounded by bloodthirsty killers who want to eradicate her from existence. They profess that they want to be friends with Saudi Arabia, and yet all Israeli governments are the last of the Western colonizing powers of the Middle East. Israeli governments have arrested thousands of the inhabitants of the lands they are colonizing and incarcerated them in concentration camps under the flimsiest of security accusations, young and old, women and men, who are rotting there without recourse to justice. You cannot treat an open wound with palliatives and painkillers. For that to happen, the Arab Peace Initiative must be implemented with regard to Palestine.
Naqvi Saab, I hope you heard what Prince Turki bin Faisal said. I want your comment on that, sir.
Well, I think Prince Turki bin Faisal is a very astute diplomat, has a career, has been in this game for many, many years, and he has addressed the issue by putting together the origin of Israel and the predicament of the Palestinian people. Now, I personally feel that the existence of Israel, which was imposed upon the Palestinian people, is an aberration. And that is how the Arabs saw it. Now, over the years, because of American help, starting from the creation of Israel, when President Truman was in power, over all these years, the Americans have extended support to the Israeli state. That has enabled the Israelis to trample over the rights of the Palestinians. You see, The original resolution 242 and 3 and all the early resolutions uh, were based on two or three major points. One was the right of return of the Palestinians to their territories, from where they had gone out as refugees because of the creation of the Israeli state. The second was the status of Jerusalem that had to be decided. And the third was the creation of a state for the Palestinians, which was then agreed to by Israel in the Oslo Accord in 1990. So there is all this background. I think, as Mr. Sindhu said, that this is based on, there is a lot of history behind it. I think the legal position is strongly in favor of the Palestinians. And the points made by Prince Turki is fine, but he is only talking about the human rights situation. It's more than the human rights situation, is the legality of the issue. And the human rights situation is also a very important consideration. So on both counts, the Palestinians have been unfairly dealt with. And this is a blot on the international community and the international order. This has to be recognized, and some way should be found to put these things in their proper perspective, and not through something like the deal of the century that was
right.
just
exactly. That's what my point is. Like, coming back to Colonel Abed, let me ask you this question: that when we talk about the capital of Israel, when we talk about the visit of Donald Trump, the moment he took charge as the president, the kind of engagement of Jared Kushner and himself in diffusing the situation, his visit to Saudi Arabia, then his visit to Israel. I mean, it seems that the Republicans, they have had a very good relationship with the Israelis. I'm not saying the other Democrats do not have, but looking at the history, since you mentioned about it, I remember Netanyahu visited America when Barack Obama was the president. Joe Biden was the vice president. And he went after the president, Barack Obama. And on top, the most interesting part was that he addressed the parliamentarians out there and especially spoke to the Republicans, and was not very well, perceived by the Democrats out there. Now we are talking about the end of the regime of Donald Trump on the 20th, let's say after a month or so. And then the role of Joe Biden. How do you see that kind of an equation, sir? You believe that the Israelis would enjoy as much as they have earlier done when Trump was in power? Everything was not at all justified for the Palestinian people. Your take, Abid.
Yeah, actually, Americans have the habit of playing darling with the Israeli state over decades. Once in the 60s, they had a not very, I would not say very cordial, but they had very functional relations with the Israeli state, but they never had a tilt. And at least if they had a tilt, that was not very visible. But, after, if you talk of the 80s and 90s, so that tilt became apparent. And once Clinton administered the Oslo Accord, and with Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister, so they had a tilt towards Israel, in which they wanted to place the Israeli state in a position where its legitimacy is gained through the settlement of the Palestinian issue by the mutual consent of both the parties. Although Oslo, again, it never happened that the results which they wanted to have, they never had it. But again, the Obama also tried, and Obama was, as everyone knows, he was very perturbed because of the settlements in Gaza and because of the blockades, the measures which the Israeli states had taken, cutting off the water, the energy, the food supply, and the blockade of other amenities to the people living in Gaza. So on that account, once Obama tried to confront Netanyahu, they had a pretty rough relationship with each other. And again, why even then, whether it will be Republicans or the Democrats, why Israeli state had a soft corner for the USA, and the USA state has a soft corner for Israel. There are many factors because the public opinion in USA is pro-Judaism, and also the IAPAC, that is America Israel Public Affairs Committee, is also very effective, very functional. It's a sort of a process which also generate a positive public opinion for the Israeli state in USA. Again, I would say that the issue, there are two different things. One is Judaism and one
Colonel
is
Abid,
Zionism.
I'll just get back to you on that because it's such a huge subject. We've been joined in by the correspondent of TRT, Hassan Abdullah Saab. He is based in Turkey. Assalamu alaikum, Hassan Abdullah.
Walaikum salam, Professor Saab.
Thank you so much for taking out the time and talking to PTV World. Now, whatever is happening out there in the Middle East, how is it perceived in Turkey?
Well, that's a complicated question. When you talk about the corridors of power here in Ankara, there is criticism of the acceptance of Israel by some countries. I sort of missed the initial part of your discussion, so I'm not sure if this is the context. For example, when the moves that were taken by the UAE, they have been criticized here in Turkey. Turkey believes that that's going to legitimize some of the recent illegal settlements that have been set up, and also the recent developments as far as the persecution of the Palestinians is concerned. So generally, the view in the political circles here has been critical of the approaches the UAE has made, or the reports that Saudi Arabia has tried to establish relations with Israel.
When you talk about the Gulf countries, primarily Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, most likely a couple of other countries as well, if they accept the state of Israel, sir, do you think it is going to be a major blow to the actual Palestinian cause?
Well, I think that's quite clear because obviously there is the question of legitimacy. So many of the moves that the Zionist establishment has not taken is perhaps because of the perceived reaction that could come from the Muslim world. So when they feel that prominent Muslim countries that are seen as having a central role in the Islamic world, if they've accepted at a time when Israel is violating not just the international law, but it continues to violate even some of the most recent agreements that have been reached pertaining to maintaining the status quo, then that's obviously going to encourage Israel. So I think as far as for example, establishment of illegal settlements is concerned, and I think that's also going to have an impact on the status of Jerusalem. So I think it's difficult to say that there's going to be any second opinion on this.
All right, you stay with us, and let me take the same point to Colonel Abid now, and after that I'll go to Ambassador Saab. Colonel Saab, a very clear-cut formula was presented. That was about the two-state solution. Interestingly, nothing happened. I mean, do you think Israel is going to step back in any way? Because I don't think he is the kind of person, when you talk about Netanyahu or a couple of other hardliners there as well, they will not even let them have that inch of land back to the Palestinian people. Talking about the capital, talking about so many other issues out there, talking about Gaza, Golan Heights, I mean, you name it, and the problem is there. Sir.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. That was the point which I was trying to make earlier, that there are two different things. One is the Judaism and one is the Zionism. Judaism is a concept, it's a unique concept in which both the nationality and religion is sort of co-twined. It is in this one word. But Zionism earlier, before Netanyahu, almost all the rulers, and most of them, of the Israeli rulers of the Israeli state, were from the Zionist left. They were progressive in their own context, in their own meaning, and in their own, I would say, the definition of the word. But Netanyahu is a different case. He is Zionist and he is a rightist also. And in that context, you are absolutely right once you say that he is not going to trade even an inch of land with Palestinians. And moreover, the basic issue is, even if they are brought to a table and they are made to talk and they are made to discuss and they are made to believe that there is going to be a solution or a solution can be sought, even then there is a bigger problem than the land, that is the Palestinian refugees. There are over 7 million refugees, which Israel is not ready or is not by any means, it's not, I would say that they don't consider it that even they are ready to take a single Palestinian refugee. So this problem is very complex. It is a problem which is based on the territory. It is the problem which is based on the settlements, and it is also the problem which is based on the return of the refugees.
All right. Now, Ambassador Saab, in Italy, on the 4th of December, there was this, the Saudi foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan, Prince Faisal bin Farhan issued a statement, and he said that Saudi Arabia may be set to establish full diplomatic ties with Israel. Okay, great. And at the same time, it is also believed that he said that Saudi Arabia would only normalize ties with Israel within a plan that would deliver a sovereign state to the Palestinian. Sir. Ambassador Saab. I think, sir, it's mute. I can't hear you. Ambassador Saab.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can clearly hear you now. Sir.
Yeah. You see, Faisal, I think with all my high regard for the Saudi government and its representatives and the foreign minister, I would say basically that the Saudi government is trying to play on two sides at the same time. I mean, the Saudi position that Israel needs to be dealt with in a proper manner, and at the same time the Palestinian state should be planned for and should materialize, is something that we all know, the world knows, that the Israelis are not prepared to do it. Netanyahu has said it so many times that he does not, I mean, he has not said it publicly, I think, but there are reports, or very credible reports, that he has with his interlocutors made it clear that he is not going to accept any Palestinian state because, according to his reasoning, because of its security concerns. Now, if that be the case, the Israeli policy is to deny the Palestinians a state which they should have. If the situation is of that nature, then the Palestinians will not have any justice done to them. And this is the crux of the problem. The settlements keep on going on. In Palestinian territory, the Palestinian land that was usurped right away from the very time that the state of Israel was born has been usurped over all these years, and the world has accepted it. So there is no justice. There is no justice in this entire approach. In terms of realpolitik, if the countries that are taking this approach want to suppress the Palestinian voice, to keep them quiet, I don't think that will work. It has not worked over all these years, and it will not work in the future. This situation is fraught with a kind of volatility that will always disturb the peace of that region.
Now, Hassan Saab, the point is very interesting, and that is about the acceptance of Israel by the Saudis. Now, there was again another statement by Prince Faisal, and he said that this agenda of recognizing Israel and accepting Israel as a country has been there for quite some time, and it was always a part of Saudi vision. So, I mean, there have been, there must have been something going on, and there were reports that they were in contact with the Israeli authorities. A couple of other Arab leaders were too. But they had never openly accepted. Even this visit of Netanyahu to the city of Neom, I mean, the Saudis, they have said, no, he did not come. But there were reports, I mean, it was stated by Mike Pompeo that, that there was a meeting which took place in that city on that particular date between Mohammed bin Salman and Netanyahu. So when you look at that kind of an equation, it seems that this is not something new, and this is not even, I think it really boosted and it really was encouraged during the Trump's time, but this has been there for quite some time.
That's right. Faisal Saab, I think what's quite clear is that a number of countries are testing the waters at the moment. They want to see the reaction from their own people, from across the Muslim world in general, and so forth. And then, of course, they want to act accordingly. So sometimes reports are deliberately leaked to test the waters, and then there is obviously the option of denying something. The plausible deniability factor obviously remains there. As far as some people supporting it and some opposing it within the Saudi administration, for example, or certainly people close to the administration, I think this is where the moral question comes in. How does one view it? So, for example, there are those people in Saudi Arabia who perhaps have a more religious inclination, and this is the factor that's defining their morality. Then there are others like Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who seems to be more pragmatic in his approach. And from his perspective, Saudi Arabia is going to garner more influence, particularly in Washington, if Saudi Arabia was to accept Israel. And obviously there are other factors as well, vis-a-vis Iran, for example, the regional balance of power and so forth. So it depends really on what moral framework one subscribes to.
And Hassan, also please tell our viewers that, the Qatari and the Saudi relationship wasn't very good. But having said that, I mean, there were like sanctions on the Qataris by the Saudis, and there was like, I mean, I would call it bullying by Mohammed bin Salman. But having said that now, when you ask the Qatari people, I mean, Mr. Thani said that Qatar had a working relationship with the Israelis aimed at facilitating the delivery of aid and development support to the Palestinian people. So that is a very clear-cut sign. And then he says that for the time being, this relationship is sufficient to benefit our brothers in Palestine. Now, Qatar, the kind of relationship they have had, or they still have, with the Iranians, and the Iranians' support for Hamas, for that matter, again, the equation seems to be pretty confusion. Would you like to throw light on that?
Well, I think Qatar has tried to maintain a position where it's able to mediate between different players. So, for example, when we're talking about relations with working relations with Israel, Sami is right on that. But also remember that Qatar has also been, for example, hosting leaders from Hamas and from other movements. They've been welcomed there. And that, of course, has provided Qatar a certain leverage. So, you can look at it pragmatically. Qatar is maintaining a certain leverage. Qatar militarily, for example, hosts Turkish troops. It hosts American troops. It has, at one point in time, maintained very good relations with Saudi Arabia before, of course, the tensions came about. So Qatar has maintained that bargaining position, and it has used it quite well to its advantage. So I don't really think there is any sort of, contradiction if one takes into account the framework, the moral framework that Qatar abides by.
All right, thank you so much, Hassan, for your input. Ambassador Saab, now let me put this question to you in a way that the Saudis, it's a big country, it's a wealthy country, it has a lot of influence on all the neighbors. In particular, when you talk about Bahrain or UAE or Kuwait for that matter. So, talking about Qatar, if you remember, when the Saudis were not happy and they had proposed this 10-point agenda and they wanted the Qatari government to accept all those, and they were ridiculous kind of demands in that as well. And later on, they had cut off the supply routes. Food wasn't delivered, and there was a lot of hue and cry, and Iranians helped, and Turkish people or the government of Turkey also got involved. So that wasn't again very well received by the Qatari people. At the same time, when you hear that, okay, well, the Qatar Airlines is not going to fly over UAE or will not land there. There were a lot of problems and they faced a lot of issues. The trust deficit element, sir, you think that is going to be there between the Saudis and the Qataris, sir, on this particular agenda? Because he was very clear that we just want a working relationship for these particular purposes. Unlike Pakistan, where our passport has a stamp that we can go anywhere other than Israel. Oh, clear-cut stance. Ambassador sir.
Yeah. Yeah. You see, Faisal, the Qatar-Saudi differences and their problems, bilateral problems, is one issue. The other is their approach towards Israel. Now, Qatar has always had, or for a long time has had, a trade office in Israel, and they have a trade office. The Israelis have a trade office in Doha. So this is something that has been there for some time. Qatar is pragmatic in its policies, but Qatar has had differences with Saudi Arabia in recent years. Earlier, they were both in the Gulf Cooperation Council, and they were quite well disposed towards each other. I think the Saudi-Qatar issue will run the course and will eventually not figure that prominently in their bilateral relations. There are these kinds of ups and downs that keep happening. Of course, the issue is Iran. And in Iran, you see, the Qataris have gas fields with the Iranian territory, and they are adjacent to Iran. So that is something that the Saudis object to because of their tensions with Iran. So there are geopolitical issues and all that. Now, in regard to Israel, Saudi position is quite clear. They say they don't want to recognize Israel unless there is a Palestinian state that is created. Qatar will continue to have that same kind of pragmatic approach. But the Saudi position is very important, and we don't know what future holds for Saudi-Israeli equation. I think basically the point is that the Arab countries want to have dealings with Israel. They consider Israel to be a reality that has to be accepted. But the main issue in this regard is the human rights of the Palestinian people. I mean,
absolutely, sir.
Let's not talk about the territory, state, this and that. That is a bigger issue. But at least the Israelis have to respect the human rights of the Palestinians and not trample upon their human rights in such a manner that they have been doing. That is the real, to me, that is very important.
And Ambassador Saab, another quick comment, because there was a statement issued by the Qatari Foreign Minister, Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, and he said that Qatar's take on the Abraham Accords platform, saying that Qatar did not consider them as helping the Palestinian cause or the people of Palestine.
Yeah, that is true. And I think Qatar is dealing with Israel because of pragmatic reasons, but the moral issue crops up, and they do take positions very clearly on some occasions. There is this, I think, this ambiguity in the Arab position, which exists and which does not have any impact on the reality or the expediency that is being witnessed today. Of course, as you know, Pakistan has a very clear position, and we have stuck to it. And I think that we have done very well by maintaining this consistency.
All right. Colonel Abid, interestingly, when we talk about Turkey-Saudi relationship, one thing that pops up is the killing of that famous journalist Khashoggi. And the way he was killed and whatever happened, we have all, I'm sure we all followed that particular story. Trump saved Mohammed bin Salman for sure. But when you talk about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, I mean, both these, when they'll be taking charge, both are the champions of human rights issues. And this issue is going to definitely pop up. Your take on that, sir? Colonel Abid. Yeah, can you hear me, sir? Colonel Abid, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Did you hear my question, sir?
Did you hear my question, sir?
Yeah, I heard your question. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. As Ambassador Saab was also said earlier, that Middle East has stuck up in a sort of, I would say, very interesting situation. The chessboard has, has become very interesting, in which they have to decide between morality and pragmatism. Now, Israel has become known, and I would say has become an entity which is recognized, almost practically a recognized fact, in which with which you have to deal in a more, I would say, as a state, as per the norms of the international diplomacy on one hand, and also to settle the historical underlines and the historical things which have just placed the Middle East the way it is right now. As far as coming over to the Biden and the present government, the coming government of the USA, that how they are going to, take this issue as part of their policy. I would say that the Biden and the Kamala Harris and their administration, the US administration, is going to be tough with the Saudi government on the issue, and they will try to reach a point where they'll bring the solution of the so-called, I would say, the crisis of this Palestinian problem to a point where all the segments, all the parties will sit on a table. And I foresee that there is going to be, year 2021 is going to be a very important year as far as the Palestine problem is concerned. There is going to be the repetition of Oslo Accord in a more pragmatic way.
Now, talking about the Pakistani perspective, Prime Minister says that Pakistan is under no pressure to recognize Israel, and our biggest achievement is a successful foreign policy. That's what he said. Now, Ambassador Saab, I would like you to comment on that what should be because this debate is now on. I mean, a lot of anchors have talked about it. I'm not saying, I mean, if there is an issue, it can be handled diplomatically. It can be politically taken care of. But obviously, the use of force is not the issue out there. It is not at all possible. The equations have changed in the region. But when it comes to Pakistan, and I think Pakistan is one country which has a very clear-cut policy towards Israel. But for some reason, when you talk about the masses, it seems, that even if Pakistan is going to think about accepting Israel, God knows what is going to happen. Obviously, the sentiments are there. But, when you look at it in a very pragmatic manner, you need to have a different approach. What I'm saying is, reasonably, what should be the course of action which Pakistan needs to adopt? And in 2021, I mean, the pressure would be there at some stage. Ambassador Saab.
Yeah, Faisal, this is a very interesting point that you have raised. You see, Pakistan does not have any direct bilateral issue with Israel. We have no direct reason
It's
to
a
be.
principal stance that we have, taken.
We have no direct issue with Israel. So, from that point of view, we should be open to the question of accepting Israel. And in that regard, you see, people give the example of Pakistan-India diplomatic relations. Though we have a lot of
Problems.
conflict issues with India, we have diplomatic relations with them. But the point is that that may be true. However, there is the public opinion in Pakistan, which you have pointed out, which is very important.
Yeah.
And then there is the essentially moral question. I think the Prime Minister has taken that moral position. And we have always taken that moral position. You see, Pakistan was in the forefront of the Palestinian movement, demand for Palestinian settlement in the United Nations from the very beginning. The resolutions, the early resolutions were even drafted by Mr. Agha Shahi and some of his colleagues in those days. We have a signal contribution to the Palestinian cause, and we have maintained that position, and will continue to do so, as the Prime Minister says. Now,
Quick,
if we were
30
just
second
one
comment,
point,
Abid
if we were to accept and be pragmatic, what benefit will we get? I don't think we are going to get much benefit by recognizing Israel, because Israelis are not inclined to be positively.
I mean, the kind of relationship the Israelis have with the Indians. I mean, when Narendra Modi went there, and the way Mr. Netanyahu hugged him and said, "Well, I've been waiting for this moment for centuries." That tells the story. Abid Saab, quick comment on the same point.
Faisal, I would say that before taking this issue as a matter of our policy, we have to see that Israel has to it has to give away the trigonometry of violence which it has undertaken in all the three areas of the Palestinian territory and Israel, the West Bank, the Gaza, and the surrounding. So, till the time Israeli state is not trying to give as the Ambassador Saab earlier also said, the basic human rights to the Palestinian people, how can any state, any international community, any state with can have a diplomatic overtures with a state which is even not ready to grant the basic human rights to the people who are there in a conflict.
All right, Colonel Saab, thank you very much. Ambassador Naqvi, was a pleasure having you. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.